Support for I Am Salt Lake comes from KRCL 90.9, amplifying community voices since 1979. This listener-supported music discovery station covers everything from reggae and punk rock to local grassroots activism. Listen today at 90.9 FM or online at krcl.org.
This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Mark Miller Subaru, Kennedy Botanicals, and Libsyn. We're going to be telling you more about them throughout this episode.
And I want to personally thank you for joining us for episode 392 of I Am Salt Lake podcast. My name's Chris Hollifield.
And my name's Chrissy Hollifield.
How has your week been, Chrissy?
Oh my gosh, so busy.
Well, I know exactly.
So great. You know how my week's been.
I know exactly how your week's been because we got all moved into our brand new house.
Yes.
We spent our first night there last night.
Yes, which was interesting because as soon as we moved in, we realized the air conditioner didn't work.
Oh man, that is a story for a whole other episode.
That's a whole other thing. But regardless, I am super stoked.
It's a beautiful house.
It's so gorgeous. And if this is your first time listening to this podcast, you might be wondering what it's all about. Well, this podcast is all about showcasing awesome people in Salt Lake City, Utah. We get to talk to musicians, authors, business owners, police officers, restaurant owners, breweries, distilleries, really anyone who might have a cool story to share.
And we're recording today right in beautiful downtown Salt Lake City in our podcast studio that's located way in the back of Empire Merchandise. Empire Merchandise is located at 680 South State Street. Now, not only does Empire have an amazing selection of vape juice, vape accessories, they have lots of, other products here that you could check out, but they have I Am Salt Lake podcast t-shirts, short-sleeved I Am Salt Lake podcast t-shirts. So stop on in, check this place out, and pick up a t-shirt while you're here. Who's on the podcast today, Chrissy?
Today on the podcast, we are joined by retired Salt Lake City police officer Isaac Atencio. Isaac shares stories from what it was like working on the police force, his thoughts on marijuana legalization, and even what we can do as parents if we suspect that our kids are involved in gang activity. We also had a guest co-host on this episode, Isaac's son, Isaac, who is Isaac the Barber from Salt Lake Barber Company. He got to join us and help guide this conversation, so we're going to get into that in just a few minutes.
Hey, before we get into that conversation with Isaac, let's give love to one of our awesome sponsors, Kennedy Botanicals. Remember, when you support one of our sponsors, you are directly supporting this podcast.
Did you know that CBD is now legal and can be used in all 50 states? KennedyBotanicals.com is your one-stop shop for all your CBD needs.
They offer pure 100% organic CBD in capsules, tinctures, pain gel roller, and they even offer CBD treats for your furry friends. I personally use CBD for my anxiety. It's a great go-to. You put a couple drops under your tongue and you are good for the day. Also a couple drops before bed and you'll be sleeping like a baby.
And some of the other benefits of CBD include depression treatment, anxiety treatment, epilepsy, muscle spasms, insomnia, chronic pain, Parkinson's disease, reduced inflammation, and it may even help acne.
Kennedy Botanicals is a local Utah family-owned and operated business where they focus on educating you in the CBD world. They believe that educating yourself on CBD is only going to better arm you for what CBD is capable of doing.
And Kennedy Botanicals provides quality CBD products at an affordable price. Go visit their website, KennedyBotanicals.com, and learn more about their CBD products. Again, that website is KennedyBotanicals.com. Show your support for the podcast and show your support for these guys.
All right, here's that conversation with Isaac when he came over to our podcast studio to share his story on what life was like for him as a Salt Lake City police officer. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the conversation. I mean, you're both Isaac, I guess. Is there, I mean, how should we know, like, in case I'm talking to you or you, I guess just...
We could just say Isaac the cop and Isaac the barber.
There we go. Isaac. Was that tough growing up to have two Isaacs? I mean, in the same house and the whole 9 yards, right?
There's actually three of us. So I'm the third. My dad's junior. And there was a couple weird instances of like, we had a couple times where the bank screwed a couple things up between our bank accounts.
Oh, I bet.
But other than that, not really. It's funny because sometimes like my grandma will say Isaac, and I know she's talking to him, but I'm used to replying. She calls me something else. But
well, and for me being junior,
me
and my dad used to work out at Hill Air Force Base, so we were out there and we both banked at America First. And so on a Friday, we got paid, and the old man came over and said, "Hey, I need you to call over to the bank and see if you got my paycheck." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, my paycheck's not in the bank." So I called over to America First, and yeah, I had double paycheck. And I said, "Well, there's double the money in my account." And he said, "Well, I need my money." And I said, "Well, you got to prove to me it's yours." So they screwed up there, and it was really funny because I teased him for a while, but they messed up like that. And then there was another time where I pulled a credit report, and not only my stuff was on there, but my dad's and Isaac's was on there. So I had to call the, credit bureau and straighten all that out. So there's been some times where it's been kind of crazy, even though his is Isaac A, mine's Isaac Jr., and the old man's Isaac Sr., but they've messed up.
Well, just for our listeners' sake, so we have Isaac, the former police officer.
Right.
And then his son, Isaac, the Salt Lake Barber Company barber.
It's me.
Which I think, what was it? What episode were you on? 317, I want to say.
I don't know the number. But
Yeah. So I just thought it would be fun for Isaac, the barber, to sit in with his dad being chatted with on this episode. So you used to be a Salt Lake City police officer. For how long were you a Salt Lake City police officer for?
I was a Salt Lake City police officer for 27 years. I hired on in 1989, and then I left Salt Lake City Police in 2016.
Did you always want to be a cop growing up? Was that kind of your as a young kid?
Actually, I was probably, if you had asked my folks if I was going to be a police officer, they'd have said no. And I was that little kid who, if there were fire trucks coming down the road, my mom would open the front door, and I'd be running in with my hands over my ears because I was afraid of sirens. And I never thought I'd be a police officer. When I graduated from high school, my goal was to work out, at Hill Air Force Base where my dad did, get a job with the federal government, retire out there. Probably about 2 years into my career at Hill Air Force Base, the former school resource officer at West High called me up and said, "Hey, what do you think about, coming and testing for the police department?" And so I went and tested, and the first test didn't go very well, but about, they used to test every 2 years. 2 years later, I went and tested, passed the test, and the rest was history.
What did your parents think? Or family members in general? I mean, because I couldn't imagine if I had a kid going in to be a police officer.
I'd be worried. I'd be like, stay safe. Go live in a bubble.
I think initially my folks were a little bit surprised that I was looking at that. And, my mom, she's really Catholic, and, she says, "Hey, I'm just going to pray and, hopefully things will go good for you." I think they were nervous about it, but, I decided to go for it, and I did it, and it was a great career. I mean, I had a great time. There were a lot of times that I didn't discuss a lot of things that happened at work because sometimes things are just better left unsaid.
Because you kind of sent, it's quite the bio that you sent over, just because it was like, I wanted to make sure I, knew a little bit about you, what you were involved in. And gosh, you were everything from SWAT, narcotics, vice, really every aspect of the, what's the word?
The spectrum?
Yeah. Is that normal for police officers to be involved with so much stuff like that?
A lot of cops go into policing, and I know a ton of them that go in, and the only thing they do for their career is patrol.
Yeah.
Because that's what they want to do. They become police officers. They put the uniform on. They go out there every day, and that's what they become cops for, is to be a patrol cop. And I've had friends that, I've always tried to recruit them to, "Hey, come work in this job with me." And they just go, "You know what? This is what I want to do. I don't want to go work those special assignments," because Isaac can tell you they're long hours. I was pulled away from home a lot, and not just, on weekends, but at night and overnight and, 18, 20-hour days. So a lot of guys just want to do what you call 8 and skate. They just want to go in, put their time in. They want to go home, forget about it. A lot of the assignments that I worked, I was tied to a pager or a cell phone from 1992 up until the time I retired in 2016. So there was either a pager going off or a cell phone going off, and I was always pulled away from family things. So it's a tough life when you choose to do that. But, I did. I worked patrol for just a short amount of time. Then I went to Vice, narcotics. I was in detectives. I did the gang unit for a majority of my career. I worked motors. I helped with other squads because I speak Spanish fluently. So that allowed me to help with robberies and homicide, domestic violence. Other agencies called for help all the time. So I got to go help with other agencies a lot. And so it was an individual choice that I made. So that was exciting for me. And I think I chose that. And, there's a lot of regret in that because it pulled me away from my family a lot.
Was there something that you enjoyed more than the other?
I really, probably my two passions on the police department. One was SWAT, because I think I sent it over in my bio. I was probably one of the only people that I can honestly say I'm aware of that kept my SWAT gear through every assignment that I ever had on the department.
Now, what do you mean by keep your SWAT gear?
So a lot of times when you're in patrol, you can come on and you're what's called a collateral SWAT member. Full-time SWAT guys, there's only a handful, 10 or 12 guys that are full-time SWAT. That means that they're assigned to a sergeant within a bureau of the department, and they do nothing but they're assigned to SWAT. And they might have a secondary assignment that might be training other officers. It might be working with the gang unit. It might be working with robbery or, tracking down fugitives. But a collateral SWAT member is usually somebody that works somewhere else within the police department. But there's some assignments where when you go work them, motors, robbery, homicide, you go work one of those assignments and they'll tell you turn your SWAT gear in because you can't work both assignments. And for some reason, I was always able to talk whoever I was working for into keeping my gear, So it was actually kind of cool to be able to talk them into that. And I don't know if it was just an ability that I had to talk the supervisors into letting me keep my gear. But then when I started to get promoted throughout the department, I became a team leader, and then I became the tactical commander. So I was able just to hang on to that gear it was a solid 20 years of my career.
You said between 1989 and 2006, right? Is that what you said?
2016.
Oh, 2016. Yeah. So actually just a couple of years ago. So 1989, 1990, let's even go back. What kind of crimes were, I guess that's probably same crimes as there are today, but Utah, Salt Lake City's changed a lot.
Salt Lake City's changed a lot.
Even from liquor laws to the bars being private clubs back in the 90s and stuff. Did you see a change in crime in Utah, or what was
increased, decrease in specific areas?
What was the main crime that was popular? I guess. How do you phrase? I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to ask? What were people doing more back in 89, 90, 91, 92 versus 2016?
One of the things that changed a lot from the early 1990s to now, is that right out front here is State Street.
Yeah.
Back then, State Street was where everybody came to cruise up and down on a Friday and Saturday night. And it was probably the mid-1990s when they came out with the State Street cruising ordinance. And that was because, and I wish I could remember the year off the top of my head, but we were, starting to see a lot of gang activity, and there was a lot of violent gang crime going on. So right over on 100 South and State Street, there was some gang wars that were going on, and it was straight edge against one of the Mexican gangs down there. And so a carload of straight edge guys came around a corner. There was a group of, Hispanic gang members that were there, and they were sitting on the corner, and there was a homicide that took place down there. One of the straight edge kids ended up killing a Hispanic kid down there. And about that time, the department was asking for, it was called problem-oriented policing at the time. And so we've gone through some different phases of police work over the last, 30 years. started off, and this isn't just related to Utah, but it's throughout the United States, and there's, throughout the world, but problem-oriented policing, community-oriented policing was another one. But during the phases of problem-oriented policing, they were asking for ideas from troops and from supervisors. So one of the ideas that came up was coming up with this, not coming up with this one, but they came up with the State Street Cruising Ordinance. And that was, if we came out and we were patrolling State Street and we were enforcing the ordinance and we saw you go up and down more than 2 times, we were going to stop you and cite you because you were cruising.
The signs are still out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered why cruising was banned. I always thought that was the weirdest law, but now it makes more sense.
Were you really pulling cars over and stuff?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. And you would probably find a bunch of other things that they were doing illegally and busting them on that, I guess.
Oh,
yeah. Weapons.
I heard that the ordinance was just lifted just recently.
Oh, I told you. Now I can go 4 times now.
I have some car club people that come into our shop and they say that they can go cruise now, that it was potentially lifted. I'm not sure 100%, but that's what I heard.
I haven't heard that, but the whole thing with the cruising at the time, not only were we, we were taking guns off the street, we were stopping fights, we were taking liquor out of cars, juveniles, in possession of alcohol. So there was a lot that we were doing out here that was really curbing the problems that were happening out here. In fact, it was, the guy who's the chief of police right now, Mike Brown, I think, that came up with the cruising ordinance. And so we started working that. And I'll tell you, we would set up on different corners all the time. So it wasn't all, in the same spot.
So people didn't know where to look.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of a DUI roadblock thing. So we would set up and then, so we were pulling cars over for loud exhaust. We were pulling people over for seatbelt violations. If we were in a cop car next to them and, we would hear loud music coming out of the car, the loud mufflers. Back then, the lowriders with hydraulics, you can't be moving at the time you're working your hydraulics. And that was really popular back then. But we were taking, like I said, a lot of weapons off the streets. Also back during that time, it was like 1996, we were having a big gang problem. So not only was I, working that part of it, but in 1996, I was in gang suppression, and that's uniform gang enforcement. And we were at 923 South State down here, and we had just stood up a group of guys. Standing up is basically we had stopped to talk to a group of guys that were involved in a fight. And we're at, like I said, 923 South State. We had probably about 10, 11 guys up on the east side of the street there. And probably about 3 or 4 of them had walked away from us, and they went up to Belmont. They crossed the street, and they walked down right where the Honda dealership is there. And they sat down at a bus stop. Well, there was a truck that was coming east on 900 South and made a right-hand turn. They didn't see the cops. They didn't see us sitting there. We had our red and blues on. We were parked on the side of the road. We had a few motor officers there with us. And so they turned and started to go southbound. And one of the guys that was in the truck, there were 3 guys, 2 in the front and 1 that was in the back of the bed of the truck. He took a kneeling stance as he drove by the bus bench, and he just started firing there were 3 guys sitting at the bus bench.
Wow.
And so we're right across the street, and it was loud.
And you're watching this?
We're watching it. Wow. Yeah. So, you want to see about 10 or 12 cops lose it,
Yeah.
We're jumping up on top of our cars, drawing our weapons, trying to get a good sight picture on this truck. Again, we're still dealing with the cruising that's happening on State Street. Cars in our way. We can't get a clear shot. So, everything was like slow motion at that point, because we're hearing boom, 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 boom. And, we're watching the guys sitting on the bus bench, and we're watching these bodies. They're dropping. And so me and my partner, we jump into my car, and I'm driving. And so it went from slow motion to back to real time. And we get in my car and I pull a U-turn. And just as we're pulling the U-turn to go south on State Street, we're watching this kid that was sitting on the bus bench. He stands up, clear as day, and I can still see it today. I see this bullet hole in his forehead, and he's just like standing up in slow motion. We're watching, and his body hits the ground. And then all of a sudden we're back in real time and we're off to the races with this truck. And, so this chase takes place and it goes clear out to Midvale.
No kidding.
Before we catch the guy. And there were multiple agencies involved. I mean, it was a crazy night, but those are the kind of things that we were dealing with the State Street Enforcement project. And that went on for quite some time until cruising actually stopped.
Because you felt the cruising caused the crime.
It did. I mean, there was a lot of crime, but I remember being a young kid when my sister was in high school back in 73. She graduated in 73, but I remember getting put in the back seat of her car and covered up with a blanket so her and her friends could come up and cruise State Street when she was watching me. And, so cruising was something that took place here in Salt Lake for, 20 years prior to that. But it became such a problem when we started to see gangs and motorcycle gangs and street gangs that something had to be done.
Like it became a way to enable them to...
It enabled crime.
Yeah.
But the ordinance worked.
When I was 16, I remember, get a little close. Sorry, I was 16. I got a driver's license and a bunch of my buddies, man, they wanted to go cruise State Street, and their MO was to go and pick fights in cars next to them.
Mm-hmm. Go cruise State Street and then go to Crossroads Mall.
Yeah, right. Like Sears parking lot, like stuff like that, and just drive up and down and pick fights. That wasn't really like what I wanted to be doing, but like that's what my friends were wanting to do, so I was going with them.
Huh.
And it never really came to like blows, but it wasn't all just for the ride,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Mark Miller Subaru. And before we get into all this awesome information about Mark Miller Subaru, might I mention, go back and listen to last week's episode with Jeff Miller. He's the general manager over there. Really great conversation about all the history, everything you want to know about Mark Miller Subaru. Like, did you know that the Love Promise program is what makes Subaru and Mark Miller Subaru so special?
The Love Promise means being more than a car company. It's Mark Miller Subaru's vision to show love and respect to all people at every interaction with Subaru. Mark Miller Subaru is dedicated to making the world a better place.
Subaru of America actually selected Mark Miller Subaru as the country's 2018 Love Promise Retailer of the Year.
This is the most distinguished award Subaru of America awards each year, and it's only given to one Subaru retailer throughout the entire country.
Mark Miller Subaru was selected for this award because of Mark Miller Subaru's unique and strategic approach to supporting charitable causes right here in Utah. While Mark Miller Subaru has donated a sizable amount of money over the years, that's not all they do. Mark Miller Subaru develops deep and meaningful partnerships with charities to make real change right here in our community.
So whether you're buying a car at Mark Miller Subaru or just simply getting some service done, you're helping Mark Miller Subaru leave a mark on the lives of others in our local community.
Mark Miller Subaru has two convenient locations. I'm going to tell you about them. They have the Midtown one. This is the one located 3535 South State Street, right in Salt Lake City. This is the one I use for all my Subaru needs. You need an oil change, you just need a tune-up, head on into the Midtown location. But they have a Southtown location. That's at 10920 State Street in Sandy. Go test drive a Subaru today. I think you're going to like it. I really do.
Again, go visit them at their Midtown or Southtown locations. And many thanks to Mark Miller Subaru for sponsoring this episode of the podcast.
So like I said, there's a bunch of questions here. We probably won't get to all of it, but there's a few major ones. And again, I mean, if you don't want, we can edit anything out that we don't want to, you don't want to. This is a big question, even on myself.
Okay.
From Brittany Hemingway, she brought up a lot of drug-related questions.
Okay.
Which is very, very popular subject these days. And say what you want, say what you don't want. And I don't want to put you on the spot with anything, but how do you feel about marijuana? Like, honestly, and I know that's a big question. Like, how do you feel about it? But so let me how she worded it here. How do you feel about marijuana? Does he feel it was valuable for him to enforce the anti-marijuana laws?
That's a really good question because, for the entirety of my career, I mean, I did. That's what I did.
Well, of course, it was your job. It was your job.
Yeah. But nowadays, and it's not just after I retired, but even before I retired, those questions were coming up. But even since retirement, I've watched a lot of TV. I've watched a lot of specials on Netflix about medical marijuana.
Yeah.
And I think that it's got its purpose and it's got its place. And it speaks volumes when you got a person like before John Huntsman died, he started to come around to the idea, and I think he was going to be an advocate for medical marijuana. And there are other people here in the state. You've got people that are moving out of state that are of the faith, the majority faith here in the state of Utah, that are moving out of state to get help for their children. And so I'm not saying that I agree with the fact that you've got people that are walking around and dealing pot, on the streets, and that are using it, or that there's still an illegal market for it. But I do think that there's a place for it within the medical community.
Do you think it's silly to throw people in jail and prison for, there's people serving longer times in prison for marijuana. When you arrested people, were you like, this guy's just chilling out at home watching TV and eating potato chips? You know what I mean? Like, did you feel like a little like this is weird? Like, why are we doing this? Or like
there's other people that would be more important to go after?
Like, why is drugs such a big deal in the law enforcement?
It seems like it's the dealing. Really,
yeah, man.
That's the big deal, right?
Like you see other people only serving 5 years for child stuff and all this stuff, and you're like,
and I think where you're going with it is there's a certain line.
Yeah.
When you start to get people who are endangering kids' lives.
Yeah.
When they have it in their house and there's traces of it, on their kitchen counters, on their tables. You start to bring firearms into it, the dealing aspect of it, where there's dangerous people coming around, and there's, again, firearms that are brought into that. Those are the things that I saw. As a cop, you see that. You see people that are bringing that criminal aspect to the dealing. And that's where I didn't have a problem arresting those people, because when a little kid is in the house and, the dad or the uncle or the brother or the mom's boyfriend is dealing, and when people are coming in, he's got a gun in the waistband, and the intelligence that we have is, oh yeah, that guy's a dealer and he's always got a gun in his waistband. And, we've had people that become informants that say, hey man, I went over there just to buy a quarter, and this dude pulled a gun and put it to my head and said, you know what, bitch, you better not be a snitch, or because they start to get paranoid. Maybe they're using something more than weed.
Yeah.
That's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And it becomes a problem in your community when they start confronting neighbors and, putting other kids that live next door to them in danger. So there's certain reasons that it becomes criminal in nature. It's not the guy who's trying to help his kid with seizures. Mm-hmm. It's not the guy with Parkinson's who is trying to better himself. So for that, does it have a place? And would you feel stupid, arresting, some 50-year-old guy with Parkinson's that explains it to you and says, hey man, I got Parkinson's. I'm trying to use it to, look at how I am. Look, here's my seizure. But when I smoke this, it makes me better.
Did you have people like that when you were out in patrol and stuff?
No.
Really?
That wasn't, because there weren't studies for that at that point in time.
Yeah, it didn't seem like it was a discussion until just the last 5 years,
Yeah,
5 to 10 years.
I know it became medical in California in the mid-90s, I think. And then, so, if you served till 2016, you had a big chunk, because, it became legal recreationally in Colorado in 2014, I think it was. Yeah. So, it's interesting. It's interesting to me because it makes you wonder. It's like, well, is this a bad thing? Is it a good thing?
That's the thing.
And so that's what's
what
so
you said
hard.
Makes a lot of sense. Like, it in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's the people that are
it's the people that
running
make
in the
it
black
bad.
market that are that bring other things to the table, and it gets blended with violence and criminal activity.
And that's when it becomes a bad thing. That's when you go out and arrest them. I mean, cops always have discretionary measures that they can take. Did I ever pull somebody over that had an ounce on them? They didn't go to jail. Did I wrote the report? Found or seized narcotics? Yeah, absolutely. And you write it up and a person walks. I mean, it happens, but you write a report, you document it. Mm-hmm. There was never anything I didn't document in my career, but it's that criminal element that's brought into it. When you start, like I said, you've got a house in your neighborhood and they start to endanger people that are coming to their home. Yeah. That's bad. Yeah. That's when neighbors are worried because of who's coming into their neighborhood and what it makes them feel like. And that's the key element there. What do they feel like? Or do they feel threatened? Because that's what happens.
So with that being said, and it like kind of turning like more recreational nationwide, and it's ultimately, kind of gaining strong force behind essentially at some time a nationwide like end of the prohibition on it. Like, what are your thoughts on like mandatory minimums for small possession charges and like moving forward? What's your kind of thoughts on that now?
I still find it uncomfortable. I mean, I was in Las Vegas, 2 months ago?
What'd you think of all the pot shops down there, man?
I walked into a store and I looked in the display case and I was like, wow. I had never seen this before. That was
what was it? Like a little bit of weed or something?
Oh yeah, I mean there were like buds of weed being sold, and they had like big blunts that they were selling. And I called the girlfriend over and said, "Hey, check this out." And she goes, "Get away from there." I was like, "No, come here and look at this. This is crazy,
So what'd you buy?
Well, it's legal there, so I mean, hell, no. But seriously, it's still uncomfortable for him because you walk down the street and you smell it. Mm-hmm. And I told her, I said, "You smell that?" And she's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "It's weed."
Triggers you.
And
it's like a Pavlovian thing where when you smell it, you immediately think, "Oh, bad." Because you've been trained that way for so long.
And everywhere we walk down, she goes, I must be oblivious to this. I don't smell. I says, it's weed. These guys are smoking weed. And so I found myself like looking in the crowd to see who is it, and she's like, "Well, you know what? You can't do nothing. So just blow it off. I mean, don't worry about it." But still, I guess that instinct in me is to see who's smoking it.
Could you usually find the person pretty well? Do you have a really good eye for that?
But they're so open down there is that you just look over in the crowd and somebody's just like smoking and passing it, But, my feelings on it, Isaac, are that really right now, you're going to see that stuff go away because even the Utah laws changed to where, they can't really charge you until you have above 99 pounds of weed.
Right.
So I mean,
wait, what's this now? You can't charge in Utah if you have unless you have 99 pounds.
Yeah. And the thing that differentiates it is if you get pulled over, you got up 99 pounds. I mean, can they take it from you? Yeah. But can they charge you with it? The charging is the difference there. But the difference is, do I have a bunch of plastic baggies on me, and do I have a scale, and do I have O sheets?
Yeah. Does it look like a resale?
Yes.
thing?
Do I have the intent to sell it? Then there's the difference. So, am I showing that my intent is to distribute this 99 pounds?
Yeah.
And now with the legalization and the medical use of it, I think the way the laws are written are going to be what is the big difference maker here.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's got everybody, the politicians and everybody that's involved in that. I think that's what has everybody nervous and whatnot. But I think that it's gonna be the big difference maker.
It's going to be interesting to see the way it goes. And we don't need to, I don't want to make this whole episode about drug legalization, but it's an interesting thing. Because we all wonder. I even wonder myself, I'm like, would it take away crime? Would it make it worse? Because we've never lived in a world of legal drugs, legal weed, right? But we have these ideas in our head that like, well, if they just legalized all drugs, then people can get the help they need to get.
The criminal element would definitely drastically be reduced.
It seems that
I would
way.
think.
I don't know. But then there's places like California where the black market's still thriving because
it's cheaper
tax
still.
reasons.
Yeah.
But, this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Libsyn. Are you thinking of starting a podcast? Do you have a buddy or even a coworker that maybe is interested in starting a podcast? Hey, if you or someone you know, if you're in the process of starting a podcast and you are looking for the best podcast audio host out there, go check out Libsyn.com. We've been using Libsyn to host I Am Salt Lake podcast for the past 7 years, and I know that I truly could not be happier with them. They make it super easy to set up, and they make it super easy to get your podcast routed to all the podcast players out there like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of them. I Am Salt Lake podcast listeners, listen up though right now. If you use the promo code Salt Lake, all one word, Salt Lake, you will get the rest of this month and all of next month free hosting at Libsyn.com. Again, that promo code is Salt Lake. You'll be supporting this podcast directly, and you'll be getting yourself some free podcast audio hosting at the same time. Win-win. Go check it out. Go support the podcast. And many thanks to Libsyn for your support of this podcast. Let's get to a couple of these other questions because there's a few gang-related questions that I think could help listeners with their own kids even maybe, right? Aliquity. So we have an email list. I threw it out on our email list. I said, hey, do you have any questions? A friend of the show, Aliquity, she does a cool podcast called the Travel Gluten-Free Podcast. She actually lives here locally. And she asks a question, what are common signs of gang involvement which teachers should look for in the classroom?
Well, one of the things that we used to go out and we used to teach in schools all the time.
Yeah.
And Isaac's mom's a teacher. My daughter's, she's a teacher's aide. And so, and the funny thing is that one of my daughters is actually the director over a program here called Choose Gang Free. And so they actually are youth gang advocates here. And we have these conversations all the time. And one of the things for teachers is that I always tried to instill in them is try to teach from beyond the podium. Because that's one thing that I think anymore, and hopefully I don't offend any teachers that listen to your program, but, a lot of teachers anymore with the way that kids are pretty aggressive in schools anymore. I mean, they don't think that the teachers have any right to tell them anything. Mm-hmm. So they're pretty aggressive towards teachers and administrators, and teachers are a little bit afraid to get involved. And I'm not saying all teachers, but some. So I would like to say, teach from beyond the podium, walk in your classrooms, see what the kids are doing, because, one of the biggest things, and you don't see it anymore because a lot of schools have uniform codes that they have to, wear tan pants and certain color shirts or the school shirts. But if not, look for the clothing because, if you just Google it on the internet, you can see what teams are affiliated with what gangs. A lot of schools don't allow kids to wear hats anymore, but when they did, Chicago Bulls was one. And again, I'm not naming any teams here because I don't want to bring a bad stigma to certain teams, but gangs. To gangs.
Well, Utah Jazz.
I don't want to relate the team to the gang, but it's true. The Raiders, LA,
it's just like
all
a
of that.
Growing up,
it's just that.
I couldn't wear like a Dodger hat because I grew up in Southern California, right? Because LA, there was the blue hat, got the Crips,
Exactly. But, you watch that. You watch for, the blue bandana, the red bandana, the green bandana, purple bandana, those kind of things. Kids will fold those up. They'll put them in their pocket. Sometimes they're hanging out. The belts, shoelaces, they wear those color of shoelaces.
That's still a thing.
You're starting to see it creep up.
Because I was going to say, I remember that back when I was a teenager.
Well, they're probably, especially with like the schools cutting down and restricting what kids can wear more and more because of that, the kids are going to find ways to sneak it back in,
And I notice from kind of an outside perspective is that everything is cyclical, style in particular. So now you're starting to see the 90s style kind of come back into fashion. And
it's weird.
A part of that is kind of the cholo look, it's looking kind of a little bit more in that realm too. So
it's weird though how gang fashion became a fashion thing. Like, I mean, it's kind of sad. If you ask my honest opinion, maybe that's a bad thing to say. Don't beat me up.
Well, I'll tell you,
it glorifies the lifestyle, right?
What's cool about that? There's nothing cool.
Well, and for a long time it went away. We got to a certain point where, I mean, not only here in Utah, but across the United States, it was so easy to spot kids that were in gangs because of their clothing that they actually got away from wearing particular clothing here in Salt Lake. But it wasn't just here. I mean, you can still go into certain cities and states where the kids have never given up on wearing what they want to wear that relates them to a gang, Dickies and certain style of shirts and shoes, Converse All-Stars, man. I love Converse All-Stars, but that was a big one for gang members. But, here in Utah, a lot of the kids got away from that and they started wearing just normal clothes where you couldn't get a kid that was, somebody that should be wearing blue. They wouldn't ever wear red, but they started actually wearing different, red and blue color combinations because they didn't want to be found out by the cops. But, the other one for teachers, for educators is get out into the classroom and walk throughout your classroom and look at these kids' notebooks, because the one place that you'll always find is in their notebooks, what they're drawing, what they're writing, And I mean, we went into a house after a homicide one time and there was these kids that had, it was 2008. They had just accidentally murdered a 7-year-old girl.
Oh my gosh.
The guy that shot her took this rifle over to this kid's house and they hid it in this girl's bedroom. The brother of this girl hid it in her bedroom between the mattresses. So when we went over there that night and we got into the house and got a search warrant and we went in and found this gun, we get into the daughter's bedroom and, these parents that for this house, they were these, folks that they were working 2 and 3 jobs. And little did they know that their daughter, who was, I think, 12 at the time, we started to point out, do you know your daughter's gang involved? And they said, no, not our daughter. We says, well, yeah, your daughter is, she's supporting these guys that just shot this girl. And, little did they know that in her closet, everything she had was blue. And all the things that she was writing in her school notebook, the drawings, 3 dots on some girls' faces. And she had the book that was, there was a movie that was out a long time ago, probably in the 70s or 80s, Mi Vida Loca.
Yeah.
My Crazy Life,
3 dots.
She had a book about that, and she had a lot in her room that was related to that. And these people had no idea, because they were so busy working.
They were the parents.
And they were the parents. And they were just trying to make an honest life for those kids, that they had no idea about all these subtle hints that were in this girl's room. Same thing happens in the classrooms. A lot of these teachers don't recognize those things. So I would say a good way for them to reach out is to contact your local police department. I know Salt Lake City Police has a gang unit, and they'll come out and they'll teach at the school. Unified has one. West Valley has one. They have Choose Gang Free. They'll come out and they'll teach the educators, and they have PowerPoints that they can tell you, this is what you look for in a classroom. This is what you look for in the kids, how they act, how they dress, how they talk, who they're hanging out with. They'll even come out to a community and they'll talk to the parents and let them know, look, this is what you want to look for in your child.
How can we as parents educate ourselves? They probably wouldn't come to just my house, right? Explain it to me. But because all the signs that you explained about that girl, I would never have picked up on that, because it's not a world that I ever lived in. And,
the craziest thing is that parents never think to, back in the 1990s, one of the things that throughout my career that I never wanted to go work this assignment. It was called Community Action Teams. And before it was Community Action Teams, it was called the Community Support Division. And I got assigned to go work there. And I was like, nah, I don't want to go work there. And there was this one captain that called me in and he says, look, it's time for you to stop thinking of fun and just go get some great experience. And I went there And I walked away from there with just this cool toolbox of things for my career. And we used to have meetings. So basically that's when community oriented policing started. And so there was neighborhood watch and mobile neighborhood watch. And then they had the community action teams. So, in your neighborhood, go out and knock on doors, talk to parents or at the school, get a group of parents together and then contact one of these police agencies or Choose Gang Free and set up a meeting at one of the local churches or even at the school after hours and tell them, we want to know what's going on with gangs in our community, and they'll put on a training for you.
That's a good idea.
I did this stuff when my kids were growing up. I'm
going to interrupt real quick, and I just want to say, back up a little bit. My dad mentioned that his first passion was SWAT, but one thing that I really respect and admire about my dad is his probably biggest passion in police enforcement was gangs and community action. And it's carried on, outside of his retirement even. But I just wanted to mention that because I think you were getting there, but never said it. So he has a lot to offer for gangs.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That was my second biggest passion is gangs, I think, because even now in retirement, I'm president of the Utah Gang.
I was just gonna say, well, so what do you do with that? What does that job really entail?
So after I retired, I think I don't know if I told you, my son-in-law is a police officer.
I don't think you mentioned that, no.
So he's part of the Metro Gang Unit. And so Salt Lake Area Gang Project and Metro Gang Unit, still have a lot of friends there. They called me up because I'm retired and have a lot of gang experience. And they said, hey, come to a meeting with us. And there was a conference that was happening in late 2016. And they wanted me to come and help them plan it. So I went to a meeting, helped them plan it. And then in early 2017, same group of guys, we started to plan a spring conference, and they were handed off this association. So the Utah Gang Investigators Association was formed. I was in the first one back in the mid 1990s. And it got started up and kind of dissolved two different times. I was the co-chair for the first one in the mid 1990s. And then I was again involved in it in 2000s. And so that started up again. Now we started it in 2017, and these guys said, hey, you're retired. What's your calendar look like? And I lifted up my hand because that's my calendar. And I said, I'm pretty open. And so they asked if I'd consider being the president of this association. So I've done that for probably the last couple of years. And so we put conferences on. And basically our mission is to continue educating police officers as it pertains to, gang crime. And so we bring speakers in from different parts of the United States and also local speakers and current gang trends here, just so that we can, keep the cops current on what's happening here locally and also what's trending and what's going to come here. We also, again, support Choose Gang Free, or we'll support other gang advocacy programs if they get started up here, and also Utah Law Enforcement Memorial.
Another question I want to ask on that same note about gangs, a listener, Christopher, same name as me, believe it or not. Do you think gangs are increasing or decreasing here in Salt Lake City? Or is that a hard question?
I think that they're probably staying about the same.
About the same.
Back in the, like I said, gangs really started here. A lot of people don't realize that they started here probably back in the late 70s, early 80s, and they've continued to be here. Right now, at any given time, and I know this is a really loose number, you have, between 30 to 40 gangs that are documented here with anywhere between 3,500 to 5,000 members.
Each? Or altogether?
No, altogether.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, statistically from what we have in the United States, that's not like, looking in California or Texas or Arizona, those numbers are really high. Mm-hmm. But, nevertheless, nobody would ever think that we have that here, but we do. Salt Lake City was featured on Gangland, and I don't think that anybody would have ever thought in a million years that Salt Lake City would be featured on something like that, but we were featured on that because we do have a serious gang problem. For years and years, I had the guy that recruited me, the Salt Lake, or the school resource officer. That guy used to try and bring attention to the gang problem that we had here, and he was shut down as well as other cops that were working at that time. And they just shut him down and kept telling him, you know what? Don't worry about it. We don't have a problem. We don't have a problem. When they had the first gang involved homicide, I think that was 1978, they basically wouldn't dare use the word gang.
Because they didn't want to scare people or bring attention to it?
I think that it was just the stigma that it would bring to Salt Lake City. They didn't want to use the word gang, or it might have been 1987, excuse me. They didn't want to use the word gang in the reports, so they said disgruntled youth in these police reports. And it wasn't until 2009 when they had a shooting in Currens that then Sheriff Jim Winder came on the news and he said, listen, folks, we have a serious problem. We need to pull our head out of the sand. We have a gang problem. And that was the first time that I could remember anybody really standing up and saying, hey, you know what? Let's pay attention to this. We have a gang problem. And the gang unit had already been formed. It was, you had a Salt Lake City police gang unit. You had the Metro gang unit, since 1990, so that's a long time.
Yeah.
But it was kind of hush hush.
It was hush hush. Nobody wanted to admit it.
Yeah. That's sad.
I got to hear this story on when you arrested your son. I mean, before we run out of time, what's the story there? What, you legitimately arrested? Were you on duty?
Well, I guess I can
Tell
start
them
it
what your
out
bad habit was.
What was your bad habit, Isaac?
I mean, my dad, I'll say this about growing up in law enforcement family, stuff like that. Everyone thinks there's the stigma of it being real strict and probably not the ideal situation. I'll tell you that my dad, to me, first off, is my hero. He's the guy I look up to. And not only that, he was very lenient with me growing up. I will say that he taught me everything from, respecting others, just how to be a good person, I guess. Yeah. But, that being said, he was also lenient enough to the fact where, it was like, hey, if you want to slough school, and maybe this would get him in trouble, not being, I don't know. But
nobody
yeah, exactly. He's if you want to slough school, if you can afford it, I'll write you a note. If you want to try alcohol, let me know and I'll buy it for you. And that might be a no-no for a cop, But
he was creating a safe environment.
Right. It was
for you.
it was safe. It was
your dad.
It was
your dad.
If you have questions about sex or you're thinking about stuff like that, I'll buy you condoms. To me, that's huge, and that's I think how people should be open and honest with kids. Anyhow, that's just kind of giving a little
he didn't steal a car.
I didn't. No. And it, ultimately wasn't the biggest offense, I think, more so that I just wasn't as honest as I should have been with my dad. But basically, I kind of fell into a habit of sloughing school. Being a little truant. But the thing is at that time, I allowed my grades to suffer, and I started, instead of asking permission, I started just falling in the habit of leaving school, not going to class, letting my grades slip.
And parents are on the hook for that, man.
Yeah. And you can arrest kids for that, for not, I guess truancy.
Yeah, truancy officer. There's actual truancy officers in a truancy center and all that stuff. And so, that's a little backstory to how it happened, but that's mainly what transpired. I was not doing very well in school, and my dad was getting a little upset with me, and I started walking one day. I was walking downtown right through the Mormon Temple, right there on Main Street. No, I guess it was West Temple. Yeah, and I was headed to then Crossroads Mall and ZCMI Center Mall. That's where I used to go slough and get some food, a Cinnabon and some chowder, something like that, Dude,
that was the best food court.
It was. And so me and a couple friends were walking, and of course, I'm just walking. I look across the street and I see a cop car, and your gut sinks. And I then realized that not only was it a cop car,
it wasn't a cop car. I was on motors at the time. I was on my motor.
No, you had a car.
No, because I couldn't transport you guys. I called the school cop.
Yeah. Anyhow, I guess I missed that detail. But yeah, I just see my dad's face, and of course, I just.
Did you know he was going to arrest you?
Yeah, I mean, I knew something was going to happen. He was already upset with me. This is, we'd had multiple conversations. Mm-hmm. It was an in the moment reaction. I just ran. I just took off as far as I could.
You were running
as fast as I could. But my friends are back, standing back, and they just stop, and I'm running. And then I realized, what am I running for? So I stop and turn back and just, hung my
It's not like
he
doesn't know where you live, right?
Exactly. Hung my head down and went back and faced the music, and he was pissed.
How old were you?
I couldn't drive at the time, so 15. Yeah.
It was more of a lesson. Was it more of a lesson, or was it like you're like it was a lesson to see if he learned a lesson, because like he said, I grew up the same way. My mom always said, "Hey, don't slough. If you want to miss school, tell me. I'll write a note." So I was called and said, "Hey, my friends are going to slough. They're going to go. I want to go." And she'd go, "Okay." So she'd call the school and get me excused. My friends never knew that.
Yeah.
But they'd leave, I'd leave. So I wanted to raise my kids the same way. So I always told him, "Hey, you want to leave school? Just let me know so I know where you're at." Isn't that, that's it's kind of the safer way, instead of getting a phone call saying, "Hey, your kid was in a crash or got hit by a car." And I go, "No, my kid's in school." Mm-hmm. So he just got in this habit of, well, he's let me in the past, so I'm just going to leave. It's cool. And they had this thing that they thought they were pretty badass to go up to the mall and sit down and have, have food and sit and bullshit. They thought they were like businessmen, I guess, Yeah. And so I was on motors at the time. I remember clearly I'm coming down West Temple. I look over and I'm like, here's my honest thing. I'm like, motherfucker. And so I pulled this U-turn and I went, "Hey," and he like takes off running, and I'm like, I said, "Get your ass back here." And he's like on this dead run, right? And his friends have these big smiles on their faces. Well, I'll tell you what, if my head could have exploded out of my helmet, and I pull my helmet off and I go walking over there, I said, "Where the hell do you guys think you're going?" Well, they think that I'm going to be cool, at this point, because I was always cool with them. And they're just like, "Oh, we're just going over to the mall." And I said, "You know what? This bullshit." I said, "Where does he think he's going?" "I don't know." And they're laughing. And I said, "This is the last time you guys are doing this shit." I said, so I'm swearing at him, I'm pissed. And here comes this poor little old LDS guy that's going over to the family library. And he goes, "You can't talk to them like that." And I said, "Get out of here." And he looks at me and I said, "Get." And I just pointed my finger, and this poor little old guy, he looks at me like, "Oh shit." And he walks off. And I thought, "Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for that one." So a couple minutes later, here comes Isaac walking back with his head down. And they all got these smirks on their face, like no big deal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, because you're going to protect them.
Yeah. Like I'm just going to, tell him go back to school. And I was so mad. I was so enraged at this point. I don't know if I was having a bad day. I couldn't tell you right now, but I was so pissed, especially at him for running. And just, it was like he was mocking me, because there's no shit. Just slightly before that, I was driving down 3rd West and he did it again. And he's like standing behind this tree. And I'm like, so picture, standing behind a tree with your arms out trying to blend in with the tree. And I stop and I catch him that day. And then now he's doing it this day. And I thought, no, we're not doing this. So I told him, I said, I need you guys to write down your names, your birth dates, your parents' names. And I look at him and he's like, "Oh shit." And I said, "You guys are under arrest." And he's like, "Come on, Dad." And I said, "No." I said, "This ain't going to happen anymore. So you guys aren't taking advantage of me." I said, "This shit." And then he's like, "Dad, And I said, no. And I stepped away and I called the school cop and I said, you need to come pick these guys up. Just take them over to the detention facility, which was the Horizonte school. I said, I can't. I'm on a motor. Well, just call. So I said, no, I want you to come. I said, because one of them's my son. And he goes, dude, are you serious? And I said, yeah. I said, because I'm not putting up with this shit anymore.
Yeah.
So they came, they transported him down there, and I called his mom and told his mom she needed to go get him. And we were divorced at the time. And she's like, are you kidding me? I can't get away from Scott. I said, well, I'm not going to get him. And so I tell you, I did that. I went back to the motor shed and I just sat there. I shook. I was so mad. And it took me a couple hours to get over that. But
I don't know about that.
A couple of years.
I showed back up at home and he was not. I don't think he got over it that quick. I think it's one of those moments where you get like superhuman strength, man. I remember him like lifting me up by the throat and cocking his hand back. And I swear, like I was a big kid, man, and he did it with one hand, lift me up against the wall, never hit me, but like made me think he was gonna. And
was that a good learning experience though for you, man?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't lie to you and say that I didn't slough without permission again, but I kept my grades up a little better.
But you didn't try to hide in front of a tree and blend in.
But you were like, my dad's serious, man. He'll arrest me if I'm, you know, just because he's a cop or just because he's my dad doesn't mean I can get away with. Speaking, is that derogatory to call a police officer a cop?
No.
Because I was going to say, I thought they called themselves cops. I've been saying this the whole time. And I'm like,
is it a bad word?
Maybe that's insulting.
As long as you don't go, what is that line out of Super Troopers? He wants a cola for a cop.
Yeah, it's a
liter of cola for a cop. Cola. No, you know, it never bothered me.
Okay. I just didn't know. I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't even be referring to him as a cop. I don't know. You know?
No.
I didn't know, but
police officer, cop.
I want to ask you a few Salt Lake City related questions, just because I asked that to everybody here, and it's part of the show. But
absolutely,
like, do you have we all have family members, friends that visit Salt Lake. Do you have something you like to show off or show them, whether it's an area of town or a hike, camping? I don't know. Do you have like a favorite thing that you like to show off in Salt Lake or the Isaac tour?
The Isaac tour, man. You know what? When people come in to visit, Park City, someplace you take them. I always got to show them the temple.
Sure.
You know, I'm not, you know, of the faith, but you always got to show them the temple because that's cool. Take them and, you know, show them the cathedral. Always got to take them up. And even though it's not someplace cool anymore, but, you know, up walking through the Grove, I mean, that was something when I was little, you know, everybody always went up Memory Grove because it was kind of the scary place to go, you know. But just, you know, places like that, the canyons here in Salt Lake are beautiful. So I always got to take them up the canyons, you know, but yeah, Park City is just someplace that's incredible right now.
What about one or two favorite local eating spots, like a place you like to go for lunch or dinner? I'm sure you got one or two favorites, especially when you were on patrol back in the day. You had your favorites, I'm sure.
You know what's really sad about that is that cops tend to go to the same old spots and they wear them out. But, you know, like right now, if I name spots to go eat, Isaac will roll his eyes because he's like the guy that knows all the hot spots to go eat. But like I like Chili Tapin.
That's good, man. Right there on 300 West, 200 South, right there in the corner. That's good, man.
300 West, 200 South. I really like that as far as Mexican food goes. And, you know, he's going to roll his eyes at me right now. But lately we've been going and getting burgers up at Millie's Burgers.
Why? That's good.
I wouldn't roll your eyes at that. I wouldn't roll my eyes at that.
I was expecting you to say like Chili's or something.
Yeah, that would be something I'd roll my eyes at.
But, you know, I'll tell you, when you're going to notice now, I mean, you go out, you'll see cops at certain places, and cops will wear places out.
They're always at Cafe Rio.
I always see them at Cafe Rio.
7-Eleven.
Cafe Rio, 7-Eleven, you know, Crown Burger. You know, we got a good friend that owns Crown Burger up on 2nd South, 4th East, and that's why they're always in there. And it's because they're places they trust.
Mm-hmm. Well, I worked at 7-Eleven for a couple months, and we were always told, hey, give them free coffee so they hang out here because then you feel safe, right? Like they're there. You're not going to get robbed.
Well, and, you know, that was one of the things as a young cop working patrol. I always made it a point to go places that I had to pay, you know, places other than 7-Eleven because I was uncomfortable with that.
Getting stuff for free.
Yeah. Yeah. So I always made sure I made my rounds to Top Stop, to Standard, to Chevrons and stuff like that. I didn't care that they charged me. I just wanted to make sure that my face was seen everywhere.
I have to ask, have any of you ever watched It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
Do you know the episode where they play cops to get free hot dogs? It's such a good episode.
I don't know if I've seen that one.
I don't know.
Let's watch it tonight. It's fantastic.
We'll watch it.
Well, I'll tell you, it's really funny that being a cop for so long, I am still hooked on nothing but cop shows. It's horrible.
But cops or
Like real life
CSI or
Well, I don't know, NCIS, Los Angeles,
yeah, any of the cops.
Chicago PD.
Do you ever get flashbacks watching those kind of things? Like, does PTSD of any sort or any? I mean,
No. I become really critical of their tactics and stuff, of the way they do stuff, or like I like to predict the outcome of things. When you watch a movie, stuff. So,
was there a question or something that you were just hoping that we'd bring up that we didn't? And I mean, again, I know it's hard to cram everything up into a short little time. I mean, I know we didn't touch everything.
No, I had a lot just in my mind that if you asked, I could answer. I don't know. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna have to. I'm gonna have to bring you back through here or something. We're gonna have to do more, and I think even maybe do some strategic. I would like to do more. I would like to even maybe get you back through here if you'd be willing to do more of a talk more in depth on educating parents and teachers on gangs, especially us. We have almost 3 teenagers now, and so we want to keep our eyes on them and make sure that they're good kids, because a lot of times they don't know.
Well, and I'm the mom that's like, oh, it's fine, they're good kids.
Oh, geez, yeah.
So I have a lot to learn.
I hear that one a lot. That's something you hear a lot.
I bet.
Was there any we touched? We're good, or anything? Isaac or Isaac the barber?
I think that there's so many things you could ask. It's so hard to say. I think something that's kind of a loaded question, but I think kind of prevalent in today's world. But would you at this point recommend someone becoming a cop?
That's a really good question.
What would you do if you became a cop?
Well, to go back a little bit, I almost became a cop. I tested out in post and went through the physical tests and stuff like that. But for me personally, I couldn't come to terms, I think, at the time, like becoming the man, so to speak. And I'm glad that I didn't. But
I'm glad you didn't either.
Right. I respect the profession. I really do. And I see problems with it, at least in my mind, and the way that policing is moving. But, I guess if you were to double up on that question, would you kind of recommend someone becoming a cop, and maybe where do you see policing headed?
And that's a good question. I can tell you right now that policing has changed, and I think I sent this in to you. And that is that when I took the test back in 1989 to 1990, when people would show up, there were about 2,000 to 2,500 people that would show up for one single police test. Nowadays, when they put that out, there's maybe about 120 to 175 people that show up for a police test. And they're usually about the same group of people that will test for, West Valley or Sandy or Salt Lake City or Unified Police, that are all vying for that same position within a police department. And it's really sad to see that policing has gotten to that point that, it's not as sought after as it once was. My son-in-law, I recruited him into police work. He started off at the Salt Lake County Jail, and nobody ever thought that he'd be a cop, but he became a cop, and now he's working his way through that, and I'm really happy that he did. Would I recommend for people to do it? Yes, I would, because I think that it's needed and it will always be needed. I think that you saw the downward trending in police work because of some stigmas that were attached to police, and that started back in 2009. There were some bad things that were attached to police, and you saw a lot of movements against the police and a lot of police, cop haters. You saw, and I'm going to say it, and I hope it doesn't cause a problem with some of the listeners, but the whole Black Lives Matter movement and people not supporting police. But I think we're starting to see the pendulum swing the other way now. I've heard a lot of stories from people that I still know on police departments that are saying they're starting to see people come up to them now and actually thank them for what they do and tell them we appreciate your service, which means a lot to them. And it means a lot to me because I spent 27 years doing this job. So I think that we're starting to see that, even though we see people still out protesting when we have something happen. Salt Lake City's never had a really strong anti-cop movement, but it's happening across the United States. But I think that we're starting to see people actually start to support the police. The other thing that happened that made policing not be so attractive was here in the state of Utah, they changed the legislation probably about 5 to 6 years ago, where the benefits for cops aren't that great. So, when my son-in-law hired on, you could retire at 20 years. That was the retirement. 20 years was the minimum you had to work and retire. Now, these young kids that are coming in are having to work a minimum. I think it's 27 years to be able to get a retirement for less money. And I think that somewhere along the way, there has to be a voice that comes along and changes that legislation back. The other thing is post-retirement. Cops don't have benefits post-retirement. There's no health benefits. There's no life insurance benefits for everything that you go through, injuries that you sustain during your time. There's no health retirement benefits that help cops afterwards. So I think if those things change, you'll see more people wanting to be cops. But man, if I could get something out to some listeners, yeah, you know what? It was an awesome career. It was a great career. You make a lot of great friends. They're lifetime friends. And I wouldn't change anything.
To that note, friends inside the force and outside the force. I can't tell you how many times I've met someone that my dad arrested, put in prison, that shakes their hand when they run into each other these days. It happens everywhere he goes.
I also think police officers need to be paid more. From what I understand, their salaries aren't very big either.
The thing about that is that I think that a lot of police officers are right now starting to tell me that their agencies are just now starting to get them some raises, and it's been a long time coming. There's a lot of money dumped into different programs nationally, and there's a lot of money that the Department of Justice does put out for police projects that are dumped into special programs. But for police pay itself, there needs to be more money because for what you go out and do, absolutely.
I mean, every time you just pull somebody over, you don't know if they have a gun in the car. You don't know what they're going to do, just for a simple traffic violation.
I'm telling you, if more politicians and just more citizens can spend a day in the life of a cop, they'd have a better understanding of some of the things that happen. Now, I'm not going to say that, and Isaac and I have gotten into these arguments a lot. Myself, Isaac, and my son-in-law, we've sat at family dinners, and we've gotten into the arguments about gun laws and some of the shootings that have happened across the United States. True?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, police brutality, all that stuff. I mean, it's all a part of it. And, there's not to say that there's not bad cops out there, because there are, and there's enough to be a problem too,
But I'll tell you, right here in the state of Utah, you have some of the best trained cops in the nation. And I'll tell you, I came from Salt Lake City Police Department, and man, I couldn't be more proud to have come from someplace. Some of the best trained cops and some of the best people are still there. Unified Police, I've had the opportunity to work with them and stuff, and I still work with them now. Some of the greatest cops, but right here in this valley. And when I hear people, start slamming and talk negative about them, it's hard. It's hard to sit back and not say anything. But if I could even use this podcast as a recruiting method, absolutely, man. If you have any doubt and you've been thinking about it and you want to do it, I'd say test.
So just get online. I mean, is there somewhere they need to go or what?
You get online nowadays. First thing you got to do is you go to the community college and you take a police entrance exam. Okay. It's called an end-post test. You take that and you want to try and score the highest you can score because that's what's going to place you. Then you go to the agency you want to work for. You fill out an online application and they'll contact you when they're hiring. You attach your end-post score to that. And then they'll call you when they have a recruitment class. But man, what a great career. I mean, Isaac will tell you, I spent 27 years there and, there's some regrets, but, for the most part, man, I had a great career and would I do it all over again in a heartbeat?
Many thanks again to Isaac Atencio for joining us on this episode of the podcast. All the links mentioned on this episode can be found at our website at iamsaltlake.com/392. That's for episode 392.
Support for I Am Salt Lake comes from KRCL 90.9, amplifying community voices since 1979. This listener-supported music discovery station covers everything from reggae and punk rock to local grassroots activism. Listen today at 90.9 FM or online at krcl.org. And before we get into weekly recommendations, Chrissy and we have some great weekly recommendations we're going to get into in just a moment. But I do want to mention that we are currently looking for sponsors for this podcast. So if you have the slightest interest, please get in touch. We have packages to fit all budgets. Send an email to hello@iamsaltlake.com and check it out. Support the podcast and let's keep the ball rolling here. All right, it is time for weekly recommendations. This is the time of the podcast where Chrissy and we just, talk about stuff we like, stuff we recommend, stuff that's new for the week. Just kind of, hey, this is what we recommend. And I want Chrissy to go first. I always let her go. I think I always let you go first.
Such a gentleman. This week, I want to recommend the Other Side Movers. So the Other Side Movers is a moving company that was built by a place called the Other Side Academy. And what they do here in Salt Lake is they help people rehabilitate from being addicts, any, drug addicts, alcohol addiction. And so it's a way to get those people into a good job, and they're fantastic movers.
Well, they do a bang-up job.
Yeah, we had them move us the last time we moved.
This is going to be the second time we're having them move.
Yeah, I mean, they're like the nicest guys. They're so professional. They're just, I don't know, really friendly. I enjoyed hanging out with them while they were moving our stuff.
And what I was impressed with, Chrissy, the first time when they moved us into this apartment that we're moving out of downtown, is they didn't complain.
Oh,
right?
Not at all. They were super cool.
We had this couch that we had to move on the third floor, which oh my gosh.
It was a nightmare.
And they could have easily just complained, but they did it and they just got in and did it.
Yeah, I know. I can't believe they weren't like, F you guys, we're out of here. So props to them. Call the Other Side Movers if you need to move.
And my recommendation, I might have recommended this already. It is so good. It is the big salad at Lucky 13. And the only reason I want to recommend it again is because we have not been to Lucky 13 for a while.
Oh my gosh. I can't even really remember the last time we were there.
Well, see, so we're running into the problem right now where we have a 2-year-old with us most of the time.
Yes.
In a place like Lucky 13, you can't take babies in there because they have the licensing.
The whole restaurant bar thing.
So it makes it really tough, man.
Yeah.
To go into places, I cannot wait until those stupid laws are lifted here.
Wouldn't it be Utah? Let's get like every other state. Let's bring our babies into the bars. Come on.
Can you imagine that? Oh my gosh. So
that's how it is in Wisconsin.
The big salad at Lucky 13. I mean, it's got all my meats and cheeses on there. Really good salad.
They make a great salad, which is a weird thing to say for like a great burger joint, but man, Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Don't forget to support our show sponsors, Mark Miller Subaru, Kennedy Botanicals, and Libsyn. We'll have links for all of them at our website under the notes for this episode, which you can find at iamsaltlake.com. And you can always send us letters, postcards, or packages at P.O. Box 4412, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84110.
And if you mail us stuff, we will talk about it here on the podcast.
Send me cookies. I'll tell everyone.
You have a great week. Make sure to get out and enjoy the city. Support local whenever possible. And we'll see you on the next episode.
And good night, Grammy.